Hello and welcome to this podcast from the BBC World Service. Please let us know what you think and tell other people about us on social media. Podcasts from the BBC World Service are supported by advertising.
I'm sure many of you, like me, at some point in your lives, probably when you were younger, have sat patiently to watch a colony of ants going about their business. I was always intrigued by how the long lines of dark little bodies streaming across the paving stones and over the grass could all figure out where they were each meant to go. Like a well-oiled team, ants often resemble a regimented army, following every order given by their leader, telling them what to do. But that's where I was wrong. You see, ants don't act in obedience to any one army general as such. In fact, it's quite the opposite. The seemingly random activities of individual ants, each without any apparent sense of a common purpose, combine to allow colonies to collect food, build nests, and defend their host plants, all without any supervision. And now this has captured the interest of scientists. Hi, I'm Patrick Aryee and welcome to 30 Animals That Made Us Smarter from the BBC World Service, the podcast which investigates the myriad of ways in which animals have inspired us. Thanks for all your comments. It's been great to hear from you. Loads of you are clearly enjoying the podcast, so don't keep it to yourself. Go on and share this series with your friends and your family. Now, back to those ants. In this, episode number 27, we'll be discovering how ants could help us when it comes to designing better communication networks. Stanford University Professor of Biology Deborah Gordon has been studying the foraging behaviour of red harvester ants for over 30 years. This is just one of more than 14,000 species of ant across the globe that live in virtually every habitat and have to deal with all sorts of ecological challenges. Red harvester ants forage for seeds, but when they go out in the sun to find these seeds, part of the operating cost they have to contend with is the loss of water from being out in the hot sun. When they return to the nest, they can replenish themselves with water from the seeds they eat. To avoid dehydration, each ant needs to be smart about how far it travels in search of the seeds they feed on. Now, back to the human world. In the early days of the internet, operating costs were so high that it wasn't even worth sending out data if the bandwidth wasn't available. They might seem like worlds apart, the internet and a colony of ants, but in both these systems, we see that positive feedback stimulates activity. A forager ant won't go out looking for seeds unless lots of other foragers return with seeds. Likewise, data from a computer doesn't go out unless the computer gets a signal confirming that previous data packets had enough bandwidth to move along. Deborah Gordon's research showed that the movement of harvester ants can be described with an algorithm or mathematical rule to regulate the flow of foragers that's very similar to the algorithm used by the internet to regulate the flow of data. In both cases, the algorithms serve to regulate operating costs, whether it's bandwidth for data transfers or water for ants. Had this discovery been made in the 1970s, before the internet algorithm had been written, then the harvester ants might very well have influenced the design of the internet. Deborah Gordon thinks that scientists have just scratched the surface of how the behaviour of ant colonies could help us in the design of networked systems. Ants, she says, have evolved ways of doing things that we haven't thought up, but could apply in computer systems. Computationally speaking, each ant has limited capabilities, but the collective can perform complex tasks, and simple interactions can also add up to achieve complex goals in large engineered distributed systems. Right, here's a little challenge for you. I want you to imagine you're an ant. Not just any old ant, but a tree-loving species known as the turtle ant, which gets its name from the dish-like shape of its head. Okay, It's time to channel your inner turtle ant. Now, it's a warm, sunny day, and you're walking along a branch in a tangled tree canopy in Jalisco, West Mexico. You're following a scent trail left by other ants from your colony, from your nest to a source of food, when suddenly you reach a precipice. You peer down below. The branch is broken. Oh dear. What do you do now? And not just you. How does the colony work together to find a new path across the broken end of the trail? Gordon has been exploring this very problem. How do colonies make decisions? She spent hours at a time staring into the canopy, sometimes from the top of a ladder, and recording which junctions the ants chose. Her work has led to the development of a simple algorithm that explains how colonies create, repair, and prune a network within a complex maze of vegetation when no ant knows where it ought to go. Turtle ants never leave the forest canopy. Instead, they travel through a tangle of vines and branches along a circuit of trails that link together different nests and food sources. Now, nothing stays the same up there in the canopy. As food sources get eaten, the circuit changes a little every day. Nests disappear, and in some cases, branches can break in the wind or during heavy rainfall. Gordon mapped these complex trails and set up experiments to study how the ants responded when new sources of food appeared or branches broke. Together with colleagues from Salk Institute of Biological Studies at the University of California in San Diego, she analyzed the data to model how the ants repair and prune their network of trails. One thing that really intrigued me about what the researchers observed is that the ants don't necessarily follow the shortest path in their circuits. When ants travel, they follow a chemical trail left by other ants. At every junction or node, that's a place where the stems cross, the ants could get lost if others haven't traveled this route recently and left a chemical trail. If a trail gets broken, the ants can recover and get back on track. They use what's known as greedy search, working around the hole in the path by moving back to the nearest junction and choosing a new path from that point. Because the vegetation is so tangled, they're soon able to find a way to the other side of the break. The behavior used by turtle ants to optimize their search for food is one of the best studied examples of what's known as swarm intelligence. I mentioned earlier that ants leave a chemical trail. This chemical is called a pheromone. Now, a shorter path gets walked over more frequently, and so the strength of the pheromone becomes higher on short paths than on longer paths. These pheromones are volatile, meaning they evaporate over a short period of time. Now, this is really interesting. If there was no evaporation at all, the paths chosen by the first ants would tend to be excessively attractive to the ants that followed. If this were the case, the exploration of any given space would be significantly reduced. The overall result is that when one ant finds a good path from the colony to a food source, other ants are more likely to follow that path, and positive feedback leads to many ants following a single path. But when the food runs out, the ants stop traveling along this path, and the pheromone fades. So the network of routes changes and evolves over time. So, how can we use this knowledge of what ants do to help us in designing communication networks? Things get a bit technical when it comes to modeling what ants do, so stick with me here. We'll take it slowly. The amount of pheromone that an ant lays down following a tour between two sites can be described mathematically. Changes in the environment are also important. For instance, temperature affects the rate of evaporation of the pheromone. If ants are unsuccessful, the pheromone trail eventually disappears, and the ants continue to look for food elsewhere. To demonstrate how their algorithm could be useful in a global situation, the team applied their algorithm to repair networks in a human-designed transport network. They downloaded the network for the major roads and intersections for the European route E63, a 1,126-kilometre stretch of road that spans much of the length of Finland. Then they removed a major road between two intersections and ran their algorithm to repair the simulated break in the road. The algorithm, which they called Rank Edge, had a success rate of 70% in finding routes around the closure. So the algorithm they had developed based on the turtle ants could also repair breaks in real-world situations. Their findings may also have useful applications in swarm robotics. Roboticists have realized that instead of sending out one very sophisticated robot to perform a task like monitor the surface of Mars, for example, we could send out lots of much simpler robots to each cover a smaller patch within a large area. Engineers designing robots to search a burning building or another planet are using systems like those of the ants based on networks of local communication. These swarm methods can be simpler, cheaper, and more resistant to network failures than a system that uses a central control. For example, in a conventional network setup, each robot searcher would have to relay information back to a central point of communication, which in turn adds this to a map and then tells that searcher which area to go to next. Not only is a sophisticated method of control required, but if it breaks down, the function of the entire network is lost. By contrast, however, local networks can operate quickly and don't have a central control system. The control is distributed, which adds a layer of redundancy. If one robot doesn't work, the likelihood is that another robot can pick up the slack. Local interactions regulate many natural systems too, including those inside our bodies. For example, cancer cells progress in response to local interactions. Cancer cells are descendants of healthy cells. They can thrive and proliferate because they still interact with other cells using the ancestral rules. In other words, they speak the same language. This is how they can spread to other parts of the body, increase their blood supply, disarm the immune system, and turn off instructions from other cells that would stop them from reproducing. Our knowledge of how ant networks respond to different kinds of changing environments might help us see how different kinds of cancers use different algorithms in different physiological situations, which in turn could lead to new ways of tackling the development and spread of cancer. As we've discovered so often in this series, nature-inspired solutions can help us. The algorithms that produce and repair biological networks, like the network of neurons and synapses of the brain, can help us to design and navigate many kinds of engineered networks, such as subway systems. Ants have had well over 100 million years to evolve, so it's not surprising that they may be able to teach us a thing or two about how to organize our lives and our systems. Deborah Gordon's team aren't the only ones studying ants, and I've no doubt that there's still much more we can learn from them. Head over to our website now, bbcworldservice.com/30animals, for sources of information about this story. And in the next episode of 30 Animals That Made Us Smarter, we'll be hearing how the colourful feathers of peacocks are inspiring the next generation of computer screens. Thanks for listening.
When it's good, you could be sitting there talking to your favorite celebrity. Next thing you know, you could be in the Hudson River.
The conversation is about bringing together two women from different countries who have a shared experience, passion, or profession.
It was a wonderful hedonistic lifestyle.
I loved solving math questions.
I'm Kim Chakaneta, and I'm the host of The Conversation from the BBC World Service.
Working in a hospital has been my dream.
Oh, you're a roadie, it's like you must be smelly and dirty.
We're always surprised by some of the stuff that comes up. They'll say something and it's, oh, is that the same for you there in this country?
Did it spur you on, Rose? Because in a way, you've got nothing to lose.
Exactly.
What I really enjoy is finding out how eager the guests are to speak to each other.
I think this is so important to meet other women and feel inspired by them.
You're already my role model right now, Rebecca.
It's amazing to be able to hear these stories stories, to hear about their successes and to hear about their struggles.
I didn't want to be just like one story that everybody's talking about because they are shocked.
And to leave the room feeling completely inspired.
There's nothing that you can't do in this world if you set your mind to it.
That's The Conversation from the BBC World Service. Find it wherever you get your podcasts.